touch to your products. Call Romika Laser Engraving and Custom Designs today at 817-400-4040 or visit our website at romikadesigns.com. We look forward to helping you make your mark.
Hey travelers, do you want to save money on your next flight? Then pick up the phone and call. That's right, call, because the best prices are not online. They're with SmartFares. See, SmartFares has special deals with the airlines. When they have unsold seats, they use SmartFares to fill them. So you get airline tickets at ridiculously low prices. Our prices are too low to publish online. With the extra money you'll save, you can book another trip or treat yourself to dinner or shopping. So stop searching all of those travel sites to find the lowest price on your next flight. Let one of our SmartFares expert travel agents find ridiculously low prices for you. Call SmartFares today and get the best price on your next flight. Guaranteed. Also, save up to 50% off business and first class tickets.
855-325-1820. 855-325-1820. That's 855-325-1820.
Have you ever met a single person in your life that enjoys paying taxes? No one does. If you can't sleep at night because you have a huge problem with the IRS, I've got some free advice for you. This service is strictly limited to individuals that owe the IRS $10,000 or more in back taxes. And if you qualify, we can guarantee that you won't be writing a big fat check to the IRS, or our services cost you nothing. The first 100 people that call today will get a free tax consultation worth $500. Stop worrying about your IRS problem. We can help you, we promise. Call the tax doctor right now. I mean right now, to learn more.
800-240-4587. 800-240-4587. 800-240-4587. That's 800-240-4587.
Why have thousands of aspiring authors teamed up with Christian Faith Publishing to publish their book? Because Christian Faith Publishing is an author-friendly publisher who understands that your labor is more than just a book. We provide authors freedom and flexibility throughout the publishing process, professional book editing, award-winning design, and some of the highest royalty structures in the publishing industry. And as always, you will retain 100% of the rights to your book.
I was looking to find a company that I could trust, one that assisted in the editing process completely.
The most important qualities that I was looking for was a publisher who was honest and upfront, no hidden costs or fees, and owning the rights to my own work.
Christian Faith Publishing will publish, market, and sell your books in all major bookstores, online booksellers, as well as specialty Christian bookstores. Call for your free author submission kit.
800-978-4812. 800-978-4812. 800-978-4812. That's 800-978-4812.
How's it going, North Texas? How's it going, folks in the chat? What's up, Cowboys fans, Mavs fans, Wings fans? It's a nice cloudy and cold Tuesday over here in Fort Worth. But we're going to have a good conversation. As Bobby says in the chat, we're going to have a good conversation without being overly emotional here. Because if I'm being honest, there's really not much to say when it comes to the emotion of it all. Like, I think I'd be more emotional, as a matter of fact, if the Cowboys had won yesterday and if there was a better chance of them going to the playoffs. That would be something to be excited about. But what happened on Sunday, I'll be honest, I've kind of come to terms with it a little bit. I've slowly been coming to terms with the fact that their chances of going to the playoffs were slipping away anyway, you know, because while it's great for the Cowboys to win, the more the Eagles win, like the lower the odds are. So we'll talk about that a little bit more in detail as we get through this first segment. But of course, I need to introduce myself. I am your host, Jazz Monet, and this is an episode of Bitches Love Sports here on NTX Radio. Make sure y'all check out the other shows and programming on NTX Radio. Visit all the social media channels that are available for the station. But yeah, I'm looking to see what y'all are saying in the chat because this is another week where we could have done a burn book segment. And I couldn't really think of one. I thought of one this morning, though, which I am going to share with y'all. But I'm curious, for those who have not spoken your piece in the chat already, how do you feel about the way this season is panning out? And how do you feel about the game against the Vikings? And who do you blame? And so for those who may not be entirely in the loop, the Cowboys played the Vikings on Sunday and lost by a score of 34-26 at home. It was a Sunday night game. And a lot of people had high hopes for the outcome of this game because basically the Cowboys were in a position where if they went out, it increased their odds of going to the playoffs. However, thinking about what this team brings to the table, especially on the defensive side of the ball, I think that's what had a lot of people skeptical going into this game. It was just like, well, Brian Flores and that defense are giving a lot of people trouble. I think what they didn't expect was for JJ McCarthy to perform the way he did. I think what they didn't expect was to have to deal with JJ McCarthy doing the gritty in AT&T Stadium. Goodness. Oh my goodness. I don't even want to think about it. So we're going to talk about some of the major takeaways from this game, some of the stuff that Next Gen Stats pulled out, and then we'll get into just basically the long and short of it, right? Because we're kind of at a point in the season where it's like, okay, you can break down the game and do all the analytics and who did what. But what we're really talking about at this point is, okay, what does this exactly mean for Cowboys fans? What does this mean for the team? What do Cowboys fans have to look forward to? And that's really what I want to get into. But Next Gen Stats pointed out a few things. So they said Dak Prescott completed 23 of his 38 pass attempts for 294 yards in Week 15 against the Vikings. Prescott was pressured on 51.2% of his dropbacks, his highest pressure rate faced in a game since Week 12 of 2022. When under pressure, he completed just 9 of 19 passes for 120 yards. When kept clean, Prescott fared much better, completing 14 of 19 attempts for 174 yards. Well, most quarterbacks do a lot better when they have a clean pocket to pass from. So that part is not surprising. But what I will say is this when it comes to what Next Gen Stats put here, because they listed this as a Dak Prescott insight. I wish they had a category for O-line insights because I feel like this has more to do with the O-line. If you want to get more specific, you can say this has more to do with the tackles, Dak Prescott. If a quarterback is pressured this much, yeah, they're going to struggle a little bit, even if they are as experienced as Dak Prescott is. And so I think there are two things that come into play with this particular stat. One, Dak wasn't just pressured. Like, yes, this was the highest pressure rate that he's faced since 2012. That should be noted. But he wasn't just pressured. It was the way they did it. It was like if you saw Dak Prescott's post-game interview, even he admitted that he was not a fan of the zero looks. So the cover zero, so that was an issue. It was the way things were disguised up until right before the snap. It was them bringing 8 guys to the line of scrimmage. You know what I'm saying? And him having to navigate all that. That's what made this pressure so much different because if you've been following Dak Prescott, one of the things people say about him all the time is, oh, he's so great against the blitz, right? Which would typically mean that, like, even if he is pressured, he's still going to perform relatively well. But this was a situation where it's like, it's not just that he was pressured, it's how it was done. And in this situation, what that meant for him. And so the reason why I feel like this should be an O-line stat is because, yes, it affected his percentages, but it happened because of what the O-line was doing, or we could say what they weren't doing. And so yeah, it's one of those things where I've heard a lot of people sound very upset about the offense and how conservative they were being. But when you're facing zero looks that often, you only have so many options. You can either aim for explosive plays, which means, at least one of your receivers would have to run a man beater route, get open up top, and then you'd have to chug it down the field. That takes time that he didn't have because he had dudes in his lap all night because he was throwing off his back foot. Because he could feel dudes breathing on his neck who were trying to take him down. He did not have that kind of time. So, yes, it did kind of feel like they were doing what they could with the run game and with the passing game. They were putting away, and people were kind of waiting for something big to happen, but it just wasn't coming. And I don't blame him for that. Now, Schotty said he's taking some blame for that, and I could see that, because Because that is one of those things where if you're really playing chess, not checkers, you could kind of see it coming. Like, and not even saying that you can necessarily see it coming from Brian Flores, because even Brian Flores, the way that defense looked, although he is a great defensive coordinator, they were doing stuff that they had never done before in games. Some of the other stuff that's been pointed out by Next Gen Stats and by other analysts is that I think they didn't run cover 1 all night. They ran more cover 2 than they ever have. So it was a little bit different, or was it cover 0? It was one of them. They were definitely running a lot of cover 0, and that whole 8 guys on the line of scrimmage, they definitely did that more often than they had in the past. And so it was definitely one of those games where it was like, okay, they brought some things to the table that you didn't expect to see. But even if you didn't expect to see it from the Vikings, you should anticipate that, as people start talking more and more about the fact that Dak Prescott is so good against the blitz, one day somebody is going to come up with a way to still force him to have to think a little bit at the line of scrimmage. They're going to come up with something to throw him off his game. And what are you going to do when that happens? And so if you're playing chess in that regard, then yeah, you should have something in your back pocket for, okay, just in case somebody throws some really heavy blitzes at us, just in case somebody does realize that cover 0 would be a good way to combat this offense. We have this going for us. And granted, they did great in the first half, but the second half adjustments simply weren't there the way they needed to be. Now, some people might say, well, that was up to the defense to make a stop, and we'll get to that in a second. But all I'm saying there is that when Brian Schottenheimer takes some of the onus on himself and says, hey, I could have done better as a coach, I'm not mad at him for saying that. I see him on that. But I also feel like things, because we're not talking about a blowout. We're talking about what? An 8-point difference. And I just feel like with as good as Dak is and with the weapons that you have in terms of skill players on offense, that can be made up by defense and special teams stepping it up a little bit. Because just typically in the NFL, you don't want to have a team where unless your offense scores 30 points, you have no hope of winning. That's typically not what you want. So I'll put a pin in that for right now. Another stat that they pointed out, J.J. McCarthy. J.J. McCarthy completed 15 of his 24 pass attempts for a career high of 250 yards. I'm really sick of people getting career highs against the Dallas Cowboys. I really am. I need it to not be the case next season, because it's happened more times than I care to count. Because I remember at the beginning of the season, it was just like, who was it? Russell Wilson had a career game. Caleb Williams had a career game and was nominated for some in-season awards. It's just been so many people who have faced the Cowboys, and all of a sudden they're making headlines and doing stuff that they've never done before. They said McCarthy was pressured on just 22.2% of his dropbacks, his second lowest pressure rate faced in a game this season. He was particularly efficient when targeting outbreaking routes, completing 7 of 8 such attempts for 86 yards and both of his touchdowns. And so within those stats, you can see issues from pretty much every part of the defense. And that to me is the bigger issue when it comes to the season. And so even though Schotty was like, we're not about to break this down into an offense versus defense versus special teams thing, I know a lot of fans out here are like, nah, we're going to talk about this defense. Fans are still ready to get Flus up out of here, and I don't blame y'all. T-Jack says, not to mention the lack of fourth down defense all season, which is ridiculous. I'm surprised Next Gen Stats didn't pull that stat, because I don't remember what it was. And I haven't taken nearly as many notes on this game as I should have. But the number of times that the Vikings were just 4th and 3 or greater, and yeah, we're going to go for it. That is disrespectful in itself. That they just felt that comfortable doing that. That is disrespectful in itself. But then the fact that the defense proved them right, also not great. So it's you can't really be mad at the disrespect when the defense turns around and it's well, you made a good choice here. 4th and 3. Why not? Clement says, this Vikings game came down to 3 out of 12 on third downs and 2 out of 5 in the red zone. Yes. Settled for too many field goals, and it cost us in this game. This defense wasn't capable on making a few stops. Facts. And that's where that complimentary football thing comes in. Bobby says, if we do a deep dive into scoring this season, you will see that. Oh, wait. Was this continued from another? comment. I don't know. Maybe it was. Aubrey has bailed the offense out way too many times, kicking 50-plus yard field goals. Facts. And Schotty even said that. He was like, we're spoiled when it comes to Brandon Aubrey. Bobby says, Sunday, it felt like his leg was a little tired. Maybe it was. I think two of my favorite player interviews from after this game were from Brandon Aubrey and I think it was Quinnen Williams, because both of them were like really looking forward. Quinnen Williams said something to the effect that like, we're still building on something here, because they were kind of asking him, what is there to look forward to? And he was like, we're still building on something here, which is true. Something I've been saying all season is that the road to a championship sometimes takes longer than a season. And so I really respect Quinnen Williams for saying that and for acknowledging that, because they still have a reason to go out there and do their best and perform at 100%, because they need to figure out what they have going forward. They need to figure out what they're working with going forward. That's absolutely important. And Brandon Aubrey just kind of talked about the fact that every season he has a game like what he has yesterday. They don't stick out in fans' minds, but he did acknowledge that he's not as perfect as people seem to believe he is or treat him like he is, which I think is fair. I think this will stand out in people's minds just because this season has been it's been so upsetting on a lot of ways. People especially have been looking for the special teams unit to step up, and I think people thought that it was going to happen, especially considering early in the game when they had that fake field goal and, it got the offense the ball back, and, Aubrey actually threw a pass, got him the first down, which is pretty dope. As a matter of fact, I'm surprised they didn't put that stat in there. I'm like, what is Brandon Aubrey's passer rating? They didn't they didn't list him in the box score that I'm looking at. But yeah, so I guess I feel like when it comes to the offense, it's like we need to do something about the O-line, especially considering that it seems to be a revolving door every year. So even your backups need to be ready to go in and make a difference. But with the defense, I think there's a few pieces that people are excited to keep around, but I think there are a lot of pieces that people are like, okay, we need to replace him, and him. We need to do something at this position, that one, and that one over there. I just feel like this might be an offseason where they are at a point where they're like, okay, we really need to focus on the defense, which is good and bad. One, I don't remember the last time that's happened with the Cowboys where they could get away with simply focusing on the defense and most people would be happy. And two, I think it says that the offense, for the most part, has the pieces that it needs. I think they need some time to gel. I think some of the younger guys need some more opportunities to get used to stepping up, because some of them weren't really depended on until later in the season. Like Flournoy, he had way more opportunities in the second half of the season than he did in the first half. But you get better at playing football by playing football. So had he been counted on early in the season a little bit more, where would he have been later in the season? Sometimes when those situations feel new, being put in a certain position feels new, you don't perform as well as you could when it feels familiar. And that's just facts. But for me, and y'all can continue to put your burn book candidates in the chat, but for me, the burn book candidate I'm going with today, just today, is somebody who's not even on the team. And it's really more so that they said something that just kind of annoyed me this morning. And that is one, Mr. Michael Irvin. And why am I putting him in the burn book? Because he went on First Take and he said something to the effect of, y'all only call me on here when the Cowboys lose. Y'all didn't call me on here when the Philadelphia Eagles lost to us. Y'all didn't call me on here when we beat the Chiefs, but you called me on here when we lose to the Vikings. And I'm like, well, maybe it's because your proximity to the team makes you even more entertaining when the team loses. And so if I had made a burn book page for Michael Irvin, it might say something to the effect of, hey, we have to remember that Michael Irvin is a content creator now. And like a lot of Cowboys content creators, he will use his proximity to the team to his advantage. He will use it to gain whatever exposure, audience, and or money he can get. And I feel like that's what he did with this particular take that he dropped off today. So I'm going to play it for you guys. This isn't the whole thing, but I'm going to play the part that was significant to me and tell y'all what it is that I take issue with.
And we came on and we put our piece of the standard on that. Absolutely, this is a failure because the standard is the damn standard. And the standard for the Dallas Cowboys should be in the Super Bowl. Absolutely, it's a failure. Whatever word you want to failure.
All right. So Michael Irvin says this season is having a Super Bowl is fucking wild. Because the Super Bowl is a result, first of all. The Super Bowl is a result of winning, and winning is a result of what your standard should be. And so even Schottenheimer in his press conference said the standard is a standard, but he was less specific about what he meant by that. And so I'm going to be honest, I really hate the phrase, the standard is a standard. Mainly because it's like, it's been thrown around so much. They don't even realize what it means. They don't say it. And so only 2 out of the 32 NFL teams are going to make it to the Super Bowl. Only one team out of each conference is going to make it to the at the reason things like the cumulative average win-loss NFL hedges since 2010 is 6. New head coaches improve their team's percent of cases with an average improvement of around 1.3 wins. Only about 22.4% of first-year head coaches reach the playoffs. First-year coaches generally receive more patience from ownership and fans as they implement their system and build a supporting staff. So, and you could probably even exacerbate or exaggerate these numbers a little bit if you want to think about the fact that not only is Brian Schottenheimer a first-year head coach, but he was hired later than most head coaches are usually hired. So I just feel like if you came into this with the expectation that the Cowboys were actually going to go into the Super Bowl, that's like a really lofty goal. And by all means, have the lofty goals. But like your standards are things like, how is your team performing? How are they showing up to practices? How are they responding during the game when things don't go their way? How are they responding after a game to a loss? You know, and some of the things that Schotty has said throughout the season do point to the idea that he has a very good grasp on what the standards should be. He's talked about how guys respond after a loss. He's talked about the guys who will make it a point to do better or to respond, as he said in one of his recent interviews. You know, he was talking about who responds and who doesn't, you know? And so I just felt like it was real crazy to go on the platform of one of the enemies of Cowboys fans by his own admission and talk about how this season is a failure for the Dallas Cowboys. This season is not a failure. This season is disappointing. This season is frustrating. Both Schotty and Dak use the word frustrating a lot in their post-game interviews. It has been a very frustrating season, but to call it a failure, maybe certain people have failed at certain aspects of their jobs. And I would say that's especially true in the case of Matt Eberflus and Nick Sorensen. We could say that they have failed in certain regards. I'm not even comfortable calling them failures as coaches or as people, because I would say both of them in some regard have done something that can be built on. But, you know, there are definitely some aspects, especially when it comes to the defense and starting off the season so poorly, getting better, and then reverting to some really bad habits, right? Not having answers in some areas. Like, we never really did feel that confident in the secondary. We still don't know what the hell is going on with the linebacker unit. You know what I'm saying? There's just a lot of questions there that is just like, win or lose, we should at least have an idea of what the identity is or what you're aiming for there. And there's just a lot of questions. There's a lot of confusion still when it comes to the defense, right? So even had he just pointed out a couple of people and was like, you know what, I consider this and this to be a failure. But to be like, they're a failure because they didn't get to the Super Bowl, that shit is wild. That shit is wild. I feel like, considering the fact that, you know, there was such a big change made to the defense, which ultimately impacted the whole team at the beginning of the season, with Micah Parsons being traded away, then they had to deal with the tragedy of Marshawn Nealon in the middle of the season. You know, I wouldn't say that Brian Schottenheimer was even able to do his due diligence when it came to putting together a staff because of the lack of time that he had. I just don't feel comfortable calling the season a failure. I really don't. I really don't. So it's like, if fans want to be disappointed, if they want to be mad, if they want to say do better, I feel like all of that is valid. But to say that this team is a failure this year, no. We can't say that. They have too much that they can build on. I feel like whether or not they're a failure, and I think this goes back to, I can't remember who said it, like before the show even started. Who was it? Somebody mentioned Jerry Jones. Royal. Let me see if I can find it on here and I can bring it up for y'all. Because Royal was spitting facts at the beginning. Royal 007 said, I just want to get this out there. I kind of blame Jerry for his mistakes because we could have had multiple defensive players. He should have never traded Micah, and I also blame the coaching staff. And so where I blame Jerry Jones is you can point to mistakes going back to last season and how keeping Mike McCarthy on as a lame duck coach was a mistake. Because basically Schottenheimer has had to deal with and inherit the results of that. And that comes along with trying to figure out how to build a culture, in a short amount of time, build a staff in a short amount of time, and deal with a team that's used to kind of falling apart in high pressure moments. And that just seems to have responded differently to Schotty's energy. You know what I'm saying? So I feel like since we ended up here anyway, and Schotty was already in the building, I just feel like smarter decisions could have been made a lot sooner that could have set Schottenheimer up for better success this season. I also feel when it comes to a lot of the personnel decisions, like, okay, even if you ultimately did end up trading Micah, the timeline, the drama that led up to it made no sense. You know what I'm saying? So I just feel like when we look at where the defense is and how people are like, you ask anybody, you could practically get Cowboys fans, to name damn near every position on the defense. If you're just like, what do you think the defense needs? You're going to hear some people say safety, corner, linebacker, whatever. I feel like when it comes to that, you can't build a whole defense in one season. And if you look at why the defense is where it is, you can go back several years to when the Cowboys were playing converted safeties as linebackers because they didn't really have the linebackers they needed. Those are situations and problems that could have been solved a long time ago, things that could have been addressed a long time ago. So when it comes to personnel, when it comes to what they may or may not have on coaching, I also feel like that's a Jerry Jones issue, But I feel like for the most part, Schottenheimer's done the best he could with what he has. And so considering all that, I just don't feel like it's right to call this edition of the team a failure. They can do better. There's things that they can build on, and I truly believe they will. Now, on that note, there were some things regarding Trevon Diggs that I did want to get to, and I'll probably get to that at the beginning of the second segment, but I'll just go ahead and introduce some of what I'm talking about, because when it comes to personnel decisions, I feel like that's another area where we can kind of talk about, okay, Jerry Jones and his comments about Trevon Diggs. I want to look at y'all's comments here real quick, though. So writer Albert Lanier says, I got to scroll down again. The goal should really be to get to the playoffs. Agreed. Because this will be the second season in a row that the Cowboys haven't gotten there. Once again, I don't have a problem with Schottenheimer saying he wants to build a championship team. That should absolutely be a goal, not necessarily the standard. That is crazy as a standard. You're going to always feel like a failure. But as a goal, absolutely. It should be your goal to be that good to where people can feel confident saying, yeah, we see the Cowboys as a Super Bowl contender. But for Schotty being a first-time head coach, getting to the playoffs, that should be the more immediate goal, 100%. Albert continues, focus on getting into the postseason year after year and take it from there. And how about let's win more than one game in the postseason? Can we do that? Continues, you can't focus on the Super Bowl unless you have a Super Bowl team. Exactly. And then Bobby chimes in, we were sold a bill of goods and the players never delivered. Donovan, I can't spell his last name. Oh, is it Rocco? Is that who you're talking about? I'm like, we got more than one Donovan. Fowler, Murray, and the list goes on, never having a real pass rusher or scheme to disrupt the QB. And then Clement says, I agree with Albert that the goal should be to make the playoffs. 100%. Now, I still expect them to go in the media and in the press and say, we want to win a Super Bowl. They should want that, and they should fight with everything they have to get there. But I think as far as like a reasonable expectation from the fans and the way that we talk about them, playoffs. We need to see them get to the playoffs, and that needs to be the goal. CG, you're funny. CG said, I'm talking crazy with wanting them to win more than one game in the playoffs. Hey, a girl can dream, right? Anyway, we're about to get into another commercial break in a few seconds. And when we come back, we're going to talk about what Schotty and what Jerry Jones said about Trayvon Diggs and my and so stick with us. We'll be on a break for a couple of minutes, and then we'll be right back. If y'all have thoughts on Trayvon, talk in the chat. I'll address it when we come back.
Here's important new information from the Diabetes Solution Center for you, a family member, or a loved one suffering with diabetes. If you have lost your provider, or if you need a provider for diabetic supplies, you may qualify to receive your diabetic testing supplies now with little or no out-of-pocket cost, regardless of your age. All you need is Medicare or private insurance to be potentially eligible. Call the Diabetes Solution Center right now for details. Just takes a couple of minutes. Our friendly, knowledgeable agents will give you free, no-obligation information, handle all the insurance paperwork, and make sure your supplies are delivered directly to your door for free.
Call U.S. Medical Supply 24 hours a day. 800-597-9323. 800-597-9323. 800-597-9323. Call right now. 800-597-9323.
Let's be honest. Wheelchairs are heavy, bulky, and ugly. If you carry a wheelchair in your car to take care of a loved one, you know how hard it is getting that clunky, old-style wheelchair in and out of your car. Introducing the Feather Chair Wheelchair. At 13 pounds, it's the world's lightest wheelchair. It folds in seconds and fits neatly in your trunk, backseat, or closet, so you can take it everywhere. And it's only available right here. Order yours today and get a free wheelchair case, a $50 value, yours free. The Feather Chair. The world's lightest wheelchair is just $4.99 with easy payments as low as $16 a month. Sorry, no Medicare or insurance accepted. So call right now to order yours.
800-823-5826. 800-823-5826. 800-823-5826. That's 800-823-5826.
What's up? Welcome back to Bitches Love Sports. I'm your host, Jazz Monet, and we are talking about the Cowboys' loss to the Vikings, and we'll get to a little bit of read and react if we have time here in the second segment. But Albert's comment during the break made me think of something else that I saw this morning. He's talking to Clement and says that's what the old Dallas Cowboys did, contend year after year in the 70s and 80s in the playoffs. And something else that I saw this morning was people saying things like, you know, there's a whole generation of people who don't remember when the Cowboys were a Super Bowl dynasty. And I'm like, well, yeah, that's what happens when time passes. We're at what? That's a solid 30 years now. You know, that same generation that doesn't remember the Cowboys being a Super Bowl dynasty probably doesn't remember when neither the salary cap nor free agency was a thing. They probably don't remember when teams' star players would have like a coffee and a cigarette during halftime. Like, shit changes. It happens. And so if the Cowboys want the current generation to know that, we're in a different time. Just let that shit go. Don't be surprised by that anymore. It's been long enough. You know what I'm saying? Okay. So anyway, I do want to talk briefly about the Trevon Diggs of it all, just because I really think that's an interesting situation, the way things are playing out in terms of public perception and statements that are being made. So for those who may need a little update on it, Trevon Diggs had been on IR, came off of IR, and there were reports that he was supposed to play on Sunday. And then according to Trevon Diggs, they told him that morning that he would actually not be playing. Now, when Trevon Diggs was interviewed, he said he wasn't clear on why he wasn't playing. He said that he was healthy. They talked to Jerry Jones after the Vikings game, and Jerry Jones was asked about Trevon Diggs, and Jerry Jones said he's not healthy enough to play for us. And Brian Schottenheimer said something slightly different. So I'm gonna play Brian Schottenheimer's response. Now, this is one of probably about 3 or 4 times that he had to respond to questions about Trevon Diggs. And most of the time he just talked about, okay, well, there are things that we're looking for in terms of consistency, But I thought this response was particularly interesting, and I want to see if y'all pick up on why.
Question. Trevon says healthy. Jerry says not healthy. What do you guys, as a coaching staff, look at it as? Do you
I think he's moving around well. I don't think that's the only issue. Again, like I said, he and I had a very detailed conversation in the office, and we talked about the reasons. But more importantly for me, Joe, is the expectation, and that's not just an expectation for Trevon. Okay, I'm going to make that very clear. It's an expectation for all of our guys, and the standard is the standard, and I do believe that. And again, like I said, I'm not going to not play a player without having a man-to-man conversation and have them not understand why. I think it's too important. I respect them too much and what they do and what they put into it and the competitors that they all are.
All right, so he said a few things there. If we're working backwards, he says, I'm not going to have a conversation, or I'm not going to not play a guy and not have a conversation with them and make sure they understand why. He said the standard is a standard, and what he expects of Trevon Diggs, he expects of all the guys. But I think the most interesting part of all that to me was what he started off with when he was asked, hey, Jerry says he's not healthy. He says he is healthy. Where do you guys stand on that? And Brian Schottenheimer said he's moving around well, but that's not the only reason. And that was a thing that stuck out to me, because I'm just like, okay, well then what is the reason? Because this whole time we've been talking about Trevon Diggs' health. And I feel like this is the first time we're hearing somebody in charge of the decision outright say that's not the only reason. And then when you go on from there and say, this isn't just an expectation of Trevon, this is an expectation of all our guys, what exactly are you talking about? And that's where I wish there would have been like a follow-up, because I feel like, I know sometimes follow-ups are seen as pressing, and I understand that. But I feel like in this situation, with it being that the reporter who asked the question didn't say, Trevon said, you said he got a bad attitude, or whatever it was. He wasn't specific about that. So when Brian Schottenheimer says that's not the only reason, in other words, his health is not the only reason, and what we expect of Trevon, we expect of all of the guys, my next question would have been like, so when you say that, what is this expectation you're referring to that is another reason besides his health, and that's something that you expect of all the guys? Because the way it's phrased just gives people way too much room to speculate. Now, I will say, from watching Trevon Diggs' interview, I thought it was interesting that he did seem a lot more measured in his answers and just a lot more respectful. Sometimes Trevon Diggs has done interviews where it's obvious that he's irritated by the media. It's obvious he doesn't want to be there, and it's just like, ugh, this looks tense. This looks like these two groups don't want to talk to each other. Like, Trevon doesn't want to talk to the media, and they don't want to talk to him, but he's a star player, so you kind of need to because it's the Cowboys. But, like, nothing about this looks pleasant or enjoyable by any party. And then it's like, if you watch Jerry Jones's post-game where he's asked about Trevon, you could hear in his tone how irritated he was becoming just by being asked about Trevon Diggs, And so it's like, when you put all that together, it's like, why is Jerry Jones so irritated by being asked about a player everybody expected to see, Especially in a game where it's not like your secondary did particularly well. I feel like that's a reasonable question. Why are we so upset, Jerry? What are you so mad about? They didn't say anything rude. They asked a reasonable question. We thought Trevon Diggs was going to play. He didn't. He was on the sideline. What's up? Why are you mad? And then you pair that with Trevon being like, well, they told me this morning I wasn't going to play. I'm healthy. I don't know why I didn't play. And then you go to Schottenheimer like, well, yeah, that's not the only reason. It's like, wait, what's going on? So what is the reason? So it's just a lot going on there. And when you put those statements together, it does feel like it's something personal that they don't want to disclose. And I'm not one to speculate and be like, I think this is, this is what it is. So that's all I'm going to say, is that it's one of those things that definitely is coming off like there's maybe some tension, bad blood, some personal reasons that they either don't feel like Trevon is a good fit or don't want him to play. And I'm not sure what it is. But I will say this. Watching Trevon Diggs do that interview and carry himself in a much different way than we've seen in the past did give me a little bit of hope for him. Not even if he doesn't end up staying with the Dallas Cowboys. But the reason why I say that is because even if you have rubbed some people the wrong way, I'm the last person who will say that a person doesn't deserve a second chance, especially when they're young, which is something that we have to remember about all these guys. Sometimes I'm talking to, other content creators, people in the media, and I'm like, yo, can we remember that these are young guys? They're in their 20s. Go back to when you were in your 20s and think about how you responded to certain situations, especially when you were angry, felt disrespected, felt like your talents, your gifts, your value wasn't being acknowledged. Go back in your mind and think about how you responded. And you've had an opportunity to grow from that. Like, I'll even say myself, there are so many moments in my life that I'm glad weren't on camera, weren't on social media, weren't being reported on. You know what I'm saying? So I'm the last person to say a person doesn't deserve a chance to grow, doesn't deserve a chance to prove they've grown, doesn't deserve a second chance. Now, whether or not you get that unfortunately isn't always up to you. But if you are able to grow, if you are able to change, then once you are given another chance, even if it doesn't come in the form that you expected it, you can still do a lot with it. You know what I'm saying? So that's pretty much my take on that. I'm going to look at y'all's comments real quick, and then we're going to do a little bit of read and react. Caesar says, what's up, CG? The main issue with Jerry Jones is that he's what we call a proverbial Uncle Rico. Oh, I don't know that term. I've heard of Uncle Tom. That's a term me and my people use, but you might have to tell me more about this Uncle Rico. Always chasing that high he got from being part of the 64 Arkansas team that won the Natty. What? And then goes on to say, people forgot that Jerry Jones was a college football national champion. He is obsessed with having that glory and showing that he knew better than everyone else because he is a national champion. Sadly, he doesn't, and that's why the Cowboys are stuck. You know what? That's something I said a long time ago. For a little while, people were talking about the curse of Jimmy Johnson, and I went on a couple of shows as a guest, and I was asked if I believed in the curse of Jimmy Johnson, which at the time was the idea that until Jimmy Johnson is put in the Ring of Honor, the Cowboys won't see success. Well, since then, he's been put in the Ring of Honor, and the Cowboys have actually been performing worse than they were doing right before he was put in the Ring of Honor. But my response to that question, I said, I don't believe in the curse of Jimmy Johnson in the sense that I think things will automatically change when he gets put in the Ring of Honor. But I do believe in the curse of Jimmy Johnson in the sense that I think the same hubris, the same personality, the same decisions that led Jerry Jones to part ways with Jimmy Johnson, I feel like those same characteristics come into play in a lot of the decisions that he makes now. So until he grows from being that person, then yes, you're going to see the Cowboys continue to struggle. So in that sense, yeah, the curse of Jimmy Johnson is real, but it's not the curse of Jimmy Johnson. It's the curse of Jerry Jones being stuck in his ways. But I will say it does sound like he's starting to kind of evolve a little bit. Not totally getting it. Like, they asked him about Matt Eberflus after the Vikings game, and, he said that, he appreciated Matt Eberflus as a coach, gave a really respectable answer, but, then turned around on the radio and acknowledged that, yeah, it's crazy that these teams come into Cowboys or AT&T Stadium and they perform better than they have all season. So it's like, okay, so you're seeing the issue. You may not be associating Eberflus with the cause the way a lot of people wish you would, but at least you're seeing it. So you're like a step away. You know what I'm saying? So interesting developments there. But if y'all have any other thoughts about Trevon Diggs or about the Cowboys or about Jerry Jones or about Michael Irvin and why I put him in the burn book, feel free to drop those in the chat. I'm going to do a little read and react. And this is based on a story that it really started making headlines about a week ago. But what brought it to the front of my mind, because I had seen the initial headline saying that this is a thing that might happen, and this is non-Cowboys related. But I saw the headline saying that this was a thing that might happen. And then I think in preparation for the Cowboys game and some other things that I had going on this weekend, I had a couple of speaking engagements this weekend, I lost track of the story. But I had the opportunity to meet Levi McCatherine this weekend. So y'all probably heard me talk about him because he's been Jerry Jones' attorney for 30 years. And when I talked about the recent litigation involving Dak and involving Michael Irvin, I brought his name up then because he was involved in those cases as well. So this is a guy who I followed, has definitely paid attention to his work, and I finally got to run into him and actually shake his hand and speak to him this weekend. Him and his wife are lovely people. Like they're awesome. They're really dope, really fun people, very smart. But while I was talking to Mr. McCatherine, one thing that he mentioned private equity in colleges and just them entering the whole world and landscape of NIL and some of the things that colleges are doing in terms of taking their athletic departments and trying to turn a profit. And he mentioned this because I was like, yeah, I really like looking into the business side, the legal side of sports. And he was like, oh, so you must be all over this private equity situation. And I think another reason why I lost track of this situation was because no private equity deal had gone through in college. So even though I heard about this happening, I thought it was going to be like another one of the situations where there's a meeting about it, but then it ends up falling through for whatever reason, because that's what's happened in the past. But it's something that ended up actually coming to fruition. So I'm going to read the headline that I initially read a week ago from Sportico, where it says, "Tradition at risk. Utah board hears PE pitch short on specifics." So PE stands for private equity. In this article, it starts off, "The University of Utah is on the verge of blazing a new trail in college sports, spinning the Utes' athletic revenue streams into a for-profit entity and selling a large stake in that business to a private equity firm." In a 110-minute discussion about the plan at the school's December trustee meetings, many different university leaders spoke in depth about the problem the plan would potentially solve. Absent almost entirely was any actual discussion about the economics of the deal and what Ocho Capital and the firm involved would receive in exchange for an upfront check that likely tops 9 figures. Now, and I got to get my notebook. I forgot to pull my notebook out for this. Did I bring the right notebook? I'm ADHD, y'all. I have like 5 different notebooks for 8 different things. So I looked into this because I found out that the deal went through. I looked into this and I was really surprised by how this ended up being structured. So I'm really glad that Mr. McCatherine mentioned it over the weekend because I don't know if I would have looked back into it so soon. But essentially what the University of Utah has done is they have established a for-profit entity that's actually separate from its athletic department. And this is really significant for this to work out because what you've seen in the past when it comes to private equity firms trying to work with colleges is you'll see them, because the athletic department is housed within a nonprofit, the proposal is something like private credit, where the private equity firm says, okay, here's an upfront investment, and they get the opportunity to use that for facilities, for coaching hires, for maybe some investments in some NIL opportunities, things like that. And then the private equity firm then expects a return on their investment, right? So basically, the school takes on all the risk, and then the firm is guaranteed a certain return. And so that doesn't always work out well. And here's the thing a lot of people don't know. A bunch of the schools are operating at a deficit. And I'm talking 6-7 figure deficits. Actually, mostly 7 figures. Like some of these schools are like 8 figures or more in terms of the deficit that they're operating at. And this has been going back since 2019. So this isn't because of NIL. This was a problem before NIL. This was a problem before, the House versus NCAA settlement happened. And it's something that has become exacerbated since NIL has come into play, not only because of the cost of hiring and firing coaches when they have these deals where they're getting tens of millions of dollars after they get fired, and not only because of what they're paying students, both in terms of NIL pay and in terms of scholarships, but also because of the $2.8 billion in back damages that was awarded as a result of this settlement. So schools have been struggling, and as much money as they bring in, well, they're spending more. And so the University of Utah was like, we need to fix this, and it's going to take creative solutions. And that's something that I've always said, that in order to fix what's going on with the NCAA, with schools and NIL right now, is going to take creative solutions. And this is basically something that is happening for one school at one time. But if it works, it could be something that's applied at other schools. So here's what they did. They established an entity called Utah Brands and Entertainment, right? So you might have heard of things like this from hearing about like this, the San Antonio Spurs is the nearest by example to me that I think of, but they have Spurs Sports and Entertainment. And so that's the entity that controls the use of their arena. And then the Austin Spurs and their licensing tickets, so on and so forth, as well as the San Antonio Spurs and their licensing tickets, so on and so forth, are controlled by Spurs Sports and Entertainment. So this is a very similar model, right? And so Utah Brands and Entertainment is going to be in charge of ticketing, sponsorship, licensing, merch, hospitality, trademarks, so on and so forth, while the athletic department still retains the operational part of the whole deal in terms of things like hiring and firing coaches, things like that. So you won't have a for-profit entity that's in charge of hiring and firing coaches. That's still up to the athletic department, the athletic director. But when it comes to the money-making side, that's going to be controlled by this other entity. And so this is different than what private equity firms have proposed to colleges in the past, because it's not, we're going to give you a line of credit, essentially. I don't think they usually call it that, but that's essentially what it is. We're going to give you this upfront sum. You invested in these ways, and then you have to give us back this amount. What we have instead is a situation where the firm that's working with the University of Utah, Ocho Capital, is actually going to have an operational role. So they're going to have a board of directors where the University of Utah has 4 seats, the major donors have 1 seat, and Ocho Capital has 2 seats on this board. And so essentially, you're going to have a situation where Ocho Capital has to be invested in this entity actually performing, because as opposed to them having guaranteed return on investment, they are only going to get a return for themselves and their shareholders if Utah Brands and Entertainment actually makes money. So it's one of those things that, like, once you see it on paper, you're like, well, this makes so much sense. It's obvious. Why haven't they done it sooner? It's like, well, this is something that a college has never done before, because while we talk about the professional side of college sports, when people say that, they're talking about the money. But when it comes to how they operate, most schools don't actually and are not used to operating like their professional teams. And with Ocho Capital, you have guys who have worked in professional sports before, who I think all their founders came from Redbird Capital, which is one of the biggest investors in pro sports right now. And they have experience with other pro teams. One of the founders of Ocho Capital actually used to work for the Cowboys. He was integral in the building of AT&T Stadium. So, it was several years ago that he was involved in the Cowboys. But, he's got experience when it comes to that. I think he went to the Browns after that. And went a few other places. Sorry, I don't have time to go over his whole resume. But I say that to say Ocho Capital is run by guys who know pro sports, who know the operational side of pro sports, And so now they're taking that knowledge and bringing this to the college game in a way that says, okay, we're not just going to give you money and then wait to get our cut. Because other private equity firms, they go in, and what they do is they usually try to cut costs, which means people get fired. They try to bring in more revenue, which means higher ticket prices. So you've got workers that are pissed off because if they don't get fired, then they have to do more work. You've got fans that are pissed off because now they got to pay way more money than they feel like they should. And then they sometimes don't even get the school out of the deficit. And they run off with their money, but the school is left still not in a good place, sometimes even a worse place. But now we've got guys who not only do they have to be committed to helping the school do better and get out of the deficit that they're in, but they have to be committed both from a philosophical and operational standpoint, but it's also integral to them getting the return on their investment that they're expecting to get. So everybody has a stake in this. So we don't have many opportunities on this show to talk about the University of Utah, but this is a situation I'm definitely going to be following closely because, like I said, if this works, this is something I think we can expect to see implemented at other schools. And what's going to be really interesting is if other schools start to implement this, what does that mean for the NCAA and what it brings in terms of value? Albert says private equity equals pure evil. I feel you, and I think most people will say that. But that's why I'm really invested in seeing how this goes, because I feel like there's a lot of potential for upside here. Just from the knowledge of the guys who are running it and the way that it's structured. They can't just run off with the bag and leave the school in a bad place. And then there's a few other details that were revealed. Shout out to Joe Pomp. If y'all listen to his podcast on Spotify, he did an episode recently on this. And if you don't listen to his podcast on Spotify, you should. But some of the things that he mentioned, let's see, my notes are a mess. I can't find it, but it was something about the fact that if Ocho decides to opt out, right, Utah can buy their shares, right? And if they decide not to buy back their shares, they still have a say in who does buy those. So it's not even a situation where Ocho can sell their part and then just bring in somebody else who doesn't align at all with the vision of this whole project. So the University of Utah still remains very much in control, and they're also protecting the research and academic sections of their school, because that's another part that doesn't get talked about when it comes to how these athletic departments end up balancing the books. A lot of times at the end of the year, when athletic departments, if they don't report a deficit, what you might see is that they're, basically taking funds from the school to balance their deficit. And that money comes from somewhere. If it's a state-funded school, that money is coming from taxpayers in a roundabout way. Not directly, but if you start looking at the flow of money, yeah, ultimately taxpayers are having to make up for that deficit. And y'all might be like, okay, how many schools are really operating at a deficit? In 2019, it was only 25 schools in the entire NCAA that weren't operating at a deficit. It was only 25. So we're talking about a lot of schools. Most of the Big 10, Big 12, SEC, ACC, most of them are operating at a deficit in the millions. This is facts, Even Colorado, it was reported recently that they're going to end up at a deficit, even with all the money that has been brought in since Deion Sanders was there. Their athletic department's still operating at a deficit, right? And so that leaves schools with the options of things like underfunding their research and academic programs, or, cutting the Olympic sports and other things that don't bring in revenue, or they go to credit, or they go to private equity, right? So when you look at it in that regard, working with a private equity firm, creating a new entity that is for profit, and since that entity is separate, it protects the decision-making of the school, it protects their academic arm, it protects their research arm. This is probably one of the best case scenarios. This is probably one of the best creative solutions they're going to come up with for the time being. So, yeah, I'm excited about it, and I look forward to talking to y'all about it more in the future. So, I wanted to talk a little FIFA with y'all today. We didn't get to it, but I'm going to need y'all to help me manifest this. I do want to get back to doing episodes on Thursdays after the coordinators do their press conferences, maybe after Thursday Night Football. But I'm just realizing that, trying to fit everything into 1 hour on Tuesdays is crazy. And I know things have been a little bit busy. I feel like it always happens. It's like I'll start something and then it's just like, oh, my schedule gets bananas. So if y'all will help me manifest that, then we can come back on Thursday and talk about some of the things, some of the FIFA headlines that are popping up in advance of the World Cup. But for now, I'm going to go back and read all y'all's comments later to see if there's anything else in there to comment on. But I appreciate y'all joining me in the chat. Thanks for coming through on a Tuesday afternoon. And make sure y'all join me next Tuesday at 5 p.m. here on NTX Radio. I'm going to read this one last comment before we get out of here. Albert says, college athletics actually don't make outright profits. They bring in money, but are primary loss leaders. Facts, not profit centers. It's almost always that way. Yeah, you're right. And unfortunately, it's becoming a problem. But if y'all are interested, we can talk more about this on Thursday and why this is a good idea. And maybe there will be some more news about it coming out on Thursday. But until then, I'm your host, Jazz Monet. This has been another episode of Bitches Love Sports here on NTX Radio. And I'll see y'all next Tuesday. We out.
From Burleson to Venus and Grandview to Godley, this is the voice of Johnson County, Joco Community Radio.
If you are trying to quit drinking or doing too many drugs, listen to me. You don't know me and we'll never meet. I had a problem like you once. I drank and used to party a little too much till it got out of control and almost ruined my life. I realized I needed help to fix my problem before it totally destroyed me. If you've tried to fix your drinking and drug problem and you know you can't do it alone, you need to call the National Treatment Advisors. They'll immerse you into a 30-day program to replace your old habits with new habits and totally change your life. And if you have PPO private health insurance, the entire program is covered. Fix your problem right now before it gets any worse. Get clean. Call now and learn more. 877-247-1581. 877-247-1581. 877-247-1581.
Attention all business owners and creative minds. Do you need a unique and personalized touch for your products? Look no further than Romika Laser Engraving and Custom Designs. I'm Ron Phillips, co-owner of Romika Designs. We offer custom laser engraving services for a variety of products, including promotional items and corporate or personal gifts. With state-of-the-art equipment and a team of skilled designers, we can engrave intricate designs on virtually any material. Whether it's a special message, a company logo, or a custom design, Romika Laser Engraving will help you make your mark. And the best part, our prices are affordable and our turnaround time is quick.
I couldn't be happier with the work Romika Laser Engraving did for me. The engraving on my product was precise and exactly what I wanted.
So don't wait any longer to add a personal touch to your products. Call Romika Laser Engraving and Custom Designs today at 817-400-4040 or visit our website at romikadesigns.com. We look forward to helping you make your mark.
Hey, travelers, do you want to save money on your next flight? Then pick up the phone and call. That's right, call, because the best prices are not online. They're with SmartFares.